Now Sports Central, we go for our 2022 college football predictions for the Virginia Tech Hokies, team that went 6-7 overall in the 2021 season. But how this team be in 2022, that's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predict their schedule game by game in this video. Starting out with their team trends, Virginia Tech 6-7 last season. They're 3-3 in their first 6 games, 3-4 in their last 7. And this is a team that was talented last season. I certainly think they were capable of being better than 6-7 last season, but I mean, they just took a couple of really tough, close losses in the middle of the season that really were detrimental to their record in the end. But I mean, they also had a couple of really good wins. I mean, they beat North Carolina in week 1, which was a huge win, 17-10. Which, if you remember back to the beginning of the season, North Carolina, I think, was ranked number 10 in the nation there. I mean, North Carolina had some very high expectations going into 2021. Turns out they were one of the biggest disappointments of the season. But, I mean, that was a huge win for Virginia Tech in week 1 to be the first team to knock off North Carolina there. And certainly the Hokies, that was a great look for them. Ended up beating Middle Tennessee the next week by a couple of touchdowns, and they lost to West Virginia in week 3 by 6. And that's one of your tough, close losses there against a team that was certainly winnable. But they also played Notre Dame all the way to the very end. They ended up losing that game by 3, 32-29. I mean, that was, just a tough loss there against a really good football team. They lost to Pitt 7-28, which Pitt turns out they were the eventual ACC champion. Beat Duke 48-17, beat Virginia, your rival, 29-24 on the road. And then they got to their bowl game, which was just an ugly loss there in the Pinstripe Bowl against Maryland. 54-10 was the final score there. Maryland just blew out Virginia Tech, and I mean, that was a matchup. I didn't see that coming. I thought Virginia Tech was going to keep it close, potentially even win it, but in the end, just a brutal way to end off the season. But I mean, that game was just not much of a representation of the season for Virginia Tech. I mean, this team was a bit disappointing last year, but I mean, they kept it close against some really good football teams and just took a couple of close losses, 2 or 3 of those being to teams that were certainly beatable for the Hokies. But in the end, 6-7 was the record for the Hokies in 2021. But how will this team be in 2022? Looking at roster preview going to next season, Braxton Burmeister is transferred out, so he will not be around for next season. And last year, he just was a very inconsistent passer. His stats weren't really all that outstanding. I mean, he rushed for over 500 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is one of the main good points that I see out of him last season. But his passing stats were poor last year, 1,900 yards, 14 touchdowns, 4 picks, and a 55% completion rate. So his completion rate's pretty low. I mean, he threw 4 interceptions, which isn't terrible out of a nearly full-time starting quarterback. And so, yeah, Burmeister, it was a decent season, but I feel like it's going to be good for the Hokies to move on from him. And we got Grant Wells or Jason Brown. It looks like it's going to be one of those 2 quarterbacks who will be in the starting position for 2022. Seems like a pretty close quarterback battle from what I've seen, so we'll see what happens in the end. Both quarterbacks are coming out of the transfer portal. You lose your top running back from last season, Raheem Blackshear, which is going to be a tough loss. He put up over 1,000 yards last year and 7 touchdowns. But you do have Malachi Thomas and Jalen Holston both coming back, which Malachi Thomas last year over 400 yards, and Holston was right above that 200 mark. So the backfield looks pretty good, even though you do lose Blackshear, which is, I mean, that's a challenging loss, but you got a decent amount of depth there, so I'm not too terribly concerned. The receiving core I'm a bit more concerned about. Trey Turner, he is gone. Tavion Robinson is transferred out, so you lose your top 2 wideouts going into next season. The top 2 were certainly by far the most significant on this team last season. Trey Turner over 700 yards and Tavion Robinson over 600. And then, of course, your third receiver, Caleb Smith, was a ways down with 260 yards last year and 2 touchdowns. So I'm a bit more concerned about the receiving core, but even the backfield. I think the backfield, I mean, you're losing your top, which is not good, but I mean, there's a decent amount of depth there I do see. Yeah, you lose 3 on the offensive line, 2 defensive linemen, 3 in the secondary, so defensively you lose 5. And on the offensive line, you lose 3, which is also another concern. So return production could be better for Virginia Tech going to next season, but I definitely think a huge influence on how this team is next season is going to really depend on that quarterback situation. If Grant Wells or Jason Brown come out and have a really good season, which definitely one of them could, I mean, this Virginia Tech team could really be, I mean, pretty significant in the ACC and maybe make a run at their division. I mean, let me just say right off the bat here, I mean, that Coastal Division going to next season is wide open. There are 5 teams in that division that could win it next season, and honestly, we could see a 9-win team easily win the Coastal Division next season as well. So it's wide open going to next season. But how high is the ceiling going into 2022 for the Hokies now? I mean, this is a team with a few key losses, but I feel like this team is, I mean, I'm optimistic about the Hokies. I think this is a team that certainly has got potential, and I mean, I think they'll be a bowl team for sure, and potentially, once again, they'll definitely be up there and competing to win that division. But transfer portal and recruiting now going to next season. Braxton Burmeister once again, your quarterback, he's off to San Diego State, but you got Grant Wells and Jason Brown coming in. Grant Wells being from Marshall and Jason Brown being from South Carolina, your two quarterbacks at the top of the quarterback situation. Edge rusher Feldarius Payne coming in from Nebraska. Stephen Gusnell adding to the receiving corps coming in from North Carolina. But you lose Tavian Robinson to Kentucky, and you also lose Darrell Bailey Jr., offensive lineman, to South Florida. And Jaden Blue, receiver coming in from Temple. He's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. He could have an immediate impact on the receiving corps going into next season. Recruiting wise, 36th in the nation, 5th in the ACC. You got 3 4-stars and 21 3-stars coming in. So recruiting wise, not that bad. I mean, 5th in the ACC is certainly not a bad thing. You're in the top half for sure. And nationally, 36th isn't bad at all either. But that said, let's look at your schedule now going into next season. You got Old Dominion on the road. So you got a road matchup on a Friday to start off the season. And then you got Boston College coming to town in week 2. Wofford after that. And then West Virginia at home in the later parts of September. You got North Carolina and Pitt on back-to-back road games. Miami coming to town, then your bye week, and then NC State on the road to finish out October. And in November, you got Georgia Tech, Duke, Liberty, and Virginia. So, I mean, if you ask me, October is by far your toughest month of the season. I mean, you got your bye week in there, but you have to go to NC State, you have to go to Pitt, you got to go to North Carolina. And then, of course, you got Miami at home, which Miami is definitely not a team that you want to sleep on. So October is going to be a tough month. I mean, honestly, if you can get through October and September, your first 2 months, with a halfway decent record, I mean, you might be smooth sailing heading into November, because November is, other than the Virginia game, fairly easy. So looking at September here, Old Dominion on the road. I'm going to say that's a close one. Just because it's on the road in week 1, but I do think you beat Old Dominion for sure. I'd be very surprised if you didn't. Boston College coming to town, that's a close one there, but I do think Virginia Tech wins it. And then you also beat Wofford by a couple of touchdowns there in week 3. So you're 3-0 heading into the West Virginia matchup. You got the Mountaineers coming in, and that's definitely a very intriguing matchup, which I'm going to take West Virginia there. I mean, it's very close, basically a coin toss at this current point. West Virginia could be I do think, a sleeper in the Big 12. I don't think they're going to be a top team in the conference, but I could see West Virginia in potentially that 6 to 8 win range next season. I'd probably say 7 to 8 wins next season is very likely for West Virginia. So you're 3-1 heading into October. You got North Carolina and Pitt both on the road, both losses. Both teams are going to be pretty good next season. I could see North Carolina and Pitt both being 8 to 9 win teams once again next season. So certainly both challenging games, and also you got them both on the road. And then you got Miami at home. That's going to be a close one, but I do think you beat the Hurricanes, which is exactly what you need as you head into your bye week. But then you take a loss at NC State the very next week after your bye. So, and NC State next year is a team that I definitely think is very capable of winning the ACC next year. The ACC is very interesting. I mean, you got the Coastal Division. I think Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, and Pitt. I mean, those 5 teams I just listed off are very capable of winning that Coastal Division. And even in the Atlantic, I feel like the Atlantic is very competitive too. Clemson, NC State, and Wake Forest are all very competitive for that division. So, I mean, the ACC is wide open going to next season, if I'm being totally honest here. I don't really know if the ACC's got a team that's going to be in the college football playoff next year quite yet, but it's certainly going to be a competitive conference. But you're 4-4 heading into November. You got Georgia Tech and Duke. I think both are wins, and you also win your last 2 against Liberty and Virginia, which Virginia next season, I do see the Cavaliers being a real threat in the Coastal Division. They might just be my favorite to win the division. Virginia's looking good, and they're a team that I think a lot of people are sleeping on, but they shouldn't be. Virginia is a team that I could see very much being a very big contender to win that division. They're probably my favorite, along with maybe Pitt. I mean, even North Carolina, though, doesn't look bad. And once again, it's a very competitive division. I mean, any team could win it. But I've got Virginia Tech at 8-4 next season, which I think is a really good scenario. If you can get to 8 wins next year, I mean, that is really good considering, I mean, you're losing a lot of players from 2021, so you're going to be a bit of a younger team next season. of course, a younger quarterback situation as well. Well, I mean, Grant Willis has got some experience. We haven't really seen too much out of Jason Brown, but in the end, certainly a very intriguing situation for this team going to next season. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Virginia Tech, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.